Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the North of Tyne Combined Authority Early Literacy Conference in partnership with the wonderful, obviously, Kirsty Page and Launchpad for Literacy. My name is Andrew Garrod, and I'm the Senior Programme Manager for Education Improvement at North of Tyne Combined Authority. I think I need to figure out how to shorten that. Anyway, it's fantastic to have you with us today as we welcome guest speakers from various settings across the Northeast and beyond. But before we get started, I thought I'd give you some very brief background to the education improvement program that we have here at North of Tyne. And we run this in tandem with a child poverty prevention pilot program, seeing lots of P's, to provide support and really add value to our wider education system. And we're particularly looking at how we can support our children and young people in challenging circumstances. And I'm sure you'll agree that this is now more important than ever. So, as part of our devolution at NTCA, we set out to develop a joint school improvement strategy, and we established an education challenge to address these kind of academic underperformances in our North of Tyne area. So a funding package has been requested from the government as part of their budget and their comprehensive spending review and COVID-19 recovery package. But before that, we decided, while we're waiting for that to come through, we decided to fund this ourselves with the support of the Regional Schools Commissioner and the 3 constituent authorities. And we've developed a programme that brings together both our and the education improvement priorities. So we've identified 5 key objectives. The first one is to support the education recovery of North of Tyne pupils most affected by COVID-19. The second is supporting the development of our teachers and school leaders. The third is around improving transition into and between schools. The fourth is better supporting our schools in challenging contexts. And the fifth one is about improving career pathways for North of Tyne pupils. So as part of more than one of these priorities, we are delighted to be working with Kirsty at Launchpad for Literacy. And we're funding out a rollout of the toolkits to schools in the North of Tyne area that don't already have it and who would like it, and providing additional support to the whole Launchpad community like we are today in this mini conference. So we're having opportunities to come together. That was mentioned earlier, but also at the Northumberland Earliest Conference that I attended and others attended last week. That was, of course, in person rather than online. And we know it's difficult. You don't pick up those snippets of information that you would do, and you can't really replicate necessarily online. But because we have participants from across Northumberland and North Tyneside and Newcastle, as well as guests and speakers from other parts of the Northeast and further afield, so we felt in this instance that online was the way to go. So enjoy today as we bring this community together to learn from each other, learn more about the practical ways in which the toolkit has been used across schools, MATs, local authorities and other settings, and perhaps even spark some curiosity around how you might use Launchpad for Literacy in your setting. I'll put my email address in the chat if you'd like to know more about our programme, but without further ado, I'm delighted to hand it back over to Kirsty.
Oh, thank you so much, Andrew. And it's a real pleasure to be involved in this project. I don't really want to say an awful lot this morning, thankfully for you all, but I do really want to say, first of all, thank you for people who have managed to find the time to attend today. Obviously, it is a ridiculously busy time of year. And of course, I will say separately, thank you to all the speakers who are going to be involved. But before I hand over to the fabulous North Tyneside team, I just really want to say that, Launchpad is all about children, about child development and the principles of incremental child development. And really the process of beginning to use Launchpad is about understanding that. It's really an upskilling process so that you can have a toolkit, a framework to support you to think about what your children are like and also what your children need. And also where needed, that we can use that framework to identify gaps that are acting as barriers to learning and to progression or to communication. And we can establish what children can do and what they need to do next. Always my intention has been to weave Launchpad into quality first teaching within schools and settings, but also to weave Launchpad into existing supporting mechanisms. So that is why in the North of Tyne Combined Authority, we are delighted to be working in partnership with advisory members and consultants within each of the 3 local authorities. And with that in mind, I'm going to pass the baton over to the North of the Tyne advisory team, who for a while have been supporting schools and offering CPD on Launchpad implementation, which I am delighted about. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Eve, Lisa and Rebecca, and they'll be able to tell you some more, because ultimately I provide the framework. Launchpad is their story and Launchpad is your story. Okie doke, bye.
Oh, thanks, Kirsty, and thanks, Andrew. Before we start, I think it's probably prudent that we should introduce ourselves. There are some familiar people in the room to us, but I know that you won't be familiar with who we are. So my name's Eve Morton, and I'm the Primary Literacy Advisor for North Tyneside Local Authority. If I hand over to Lisa and Rebecca.
My name's Lisa Hetherington, and I'm one of the Primary Maths and English Advisors, and I work alongside Eve and Rebecca in North Tyneside.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Sowden. I am Early Years School Improvement Advisor for the Early Years at North Tyneside.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Hope that technology does not let me down. Go into... Oh, of course, I can't see the menu because of the sharing.
Was it at the top?
Yeah.
Well, I guide you left a bit.
Left a bit. Slideshow.
Left.
There we go. There we go.
That's the best one. Well
Menu
done.
bar hides the options at the top. Okay, apologies for that. Hopefully it won't go downhill from this point on. Okay. All right. So Kirsty's invited us this morning to share with you our journey with Launchpad. It's not, in the grand scheme of things, it hasn't been a particularly long journey. We're aware that there are schools up and down the country nationally who've used Launchpad before we began to use Launchpad. However, we have, I would say, probably have been engaging with Launchpad for heading on for 3 years at least now, probably. Do remember going up and joining Kirsty for a training session up in Northumberland the week before lockdown.
I think it was 2 days before the actual lockdown that we were together.
Yeah. I think literally sitting at the table saying, no, we won't have a lockdown. No. And then literally 2 days later we did. So what we're going to do with you this morning is to share our journey in terms of what we've done with Launchpad so far, particularly around a specific project that came out of COVID really, and was deliberately designed to support schools through COVID, and to also provide you with a little bit of information about what our next steps are. Obviously, this is really exciting now because Launchpad and North of Tyne are now working together. So this is very much thinking about how we can make that journey even longer and even more impactful in schools. So that's our plan for this morning. Okay, over to you, Lisa.
Thank you. I feel really proud to be a member of North Tyneside team. I think we're quite visionary and innovative, but I think when Eve brought Launchpad to the team, it was one of those moments where there's lots of light bulbs going off within our team as far as we could really see the impact that this could have across our region. And thinking of our vision, reading is very much at the heart of what we do in North Tyneside, and as well as the focus of shining a light on our most disadvantaged pupils. Our aim is to create lifelong learners with really good early reading habits. And we have an awareness of the fact that success as a reader, really early success as a reader, is a catalyst to motivation. And we want our youngest pupils to believe they can, and we wanted them to be to have that intrinsic motivation to want to read and to have that joy from talking and reading and communicating really effectively. That's our kind of overarching vision. And the reason that this project was so kind of beneficial for the now, or for the kind of previous couple of years, is that the vision that we had was very much impacted, as we all were, by the situation brought to us during the pandemic. Schools and our teachers were very much talking about the children's lost learning and those crucial foundational skills, and they were talking to us about them being building blocks, and the fact that because of some of our schools were talking about the most disadvantaged learners were the ones who weren't necessarily in school as much of the time. So there was real fundamental blocks not quite there, or not there to build upon. And there was also some gaps within children's early skills that possibly weren't being identified as forensically as they could have been. So we had some children who weren't necessarily moving phonic groups or progressing with their phonics, and schools were identifying the group of children and saying, okay, well, what we're doing is they're still working within phase 1, so we're just doing some phase 1 activities with them, but weren't really clear as to which phase 1 activity, which aspects that they really needed. So possibly not being as tight on what the children could do and what the next steps were. And then that third bullet point was around our key stage 2 children. So in a number of our settings, literacy leads and leaders were talking to us around the children with real barriers. And then when they were using their suite of assessments, they were actually identifying that these key stage 2 pupils were still having real issues around phonics. But why? But because we've kept doing phonics, we've kept putting them into those groups, we've kept putting them into small groups and giving them opportunities to develop or practice their phonics. So we thought, okay, and again, you've brought the Launchpad to us as a team, and we thought this could be a real golden nugget opportunity for us to address all of these needs, and also to kind of, it would also support our vision within North Tyneside. So that was the kind of beginning of our journey. And we do believe that we're still kind of in our infancy, but some really exciting things, and later on within the session we'll talk about the impact that we've seen.
So that'll be interesting because they've just been asked to.
Yes. Would help if I unmuted. In terms of our actual project that we began to run, we actually started this project in September 2020. So obviously we went into lockdown in March. We provided what we could to schools during the real sort of crux of that lockdown, that initial lockdown. But obviously, as we started to hit the summer term, it became very apparent, as Lisa said, that we had many of our schools who were saying, oh, we're going to be in a situation where a lot of our children have not accessed phonics and not had some of those early foundational literacy skills because they've missed so much of their EYFS provision so far. So we actually decided, we had a bit of a conversation with Kirsty, because Kirsty's a big advocate that Launchpad is very much about using it to support your curriculum and to support your practice and to support your provision, rather than it being an off-the-shelf intervention per se. So we had a conversation with Kirsty. It was actually an ex-colleague of ours, Vanessa, who's now working in a school, and we talked about how we could create a project that would support schools to begin to use Launchpad in the most effective ways and to also deepen their practitioner knowledge as well. So we came up with some key intended outcomes. So the first one, as Lisa's alluded to, was around improving outcomes in phonics attainment. We were aware that our year 1 children were going to have gaps, not just the gaps because they'd missed the phonics, but also because of the phase 1 that they wouldn't have encountered as part of their early years provision. We also wanted to focus on vulnerable groups, very aware that there were large numbers of vulnerable groups who weren't coming into school initially. And so it was making sure that we were going to put something in place for those vulnerable groups of pupils. Also focusing around improving practitioner knowledge. I don't have an early years background, but I do have a language and linguistics background. But even myself, the amount that I've learned on this project and the amount that I've learned and understood working with Kirsty and beginning to get to grips with the framework of skills has led to so much improvement in my practitioner knowledge. And we were aware that that might be something that we'd need to work on, because if you have the knowledge and you know and you understand what it is you're doing and why you're doing it, it's likely to lead to long-term impact. And then obviously within that current situation, it was really about trying to provide something that would focus on the skills as part of COVID-19 catch-up. So our initial project, and we've now run this project 2 years in a row, but our initial project involved 17 of our first and primary schools. We identified schools who were in the lowest deciles, but who also had very poor progress measures, particularly for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. So we actually approached some of those schools initially and targeted some of those schools. And then actually we had some schools who said, oh, actually, we'd like to be part of this too. And so they joined as part of that initial project group. So we had 17 schools in that first cohort, and we've now just previously had another 12 schools in our last cohort. I think it's important to say that we actually ended up with schools who were in deciles 1 to 8. So we didn't just end up with schools who were deciles 1 to 4 in that first project. There was a recognition, even amongst some of our schools who are sitting in those higher deciles, that they had children who had specific skills gaps and that they had groups of children who would benefit from the use of Launchpad as much as children who were in those lower deciles too. And actually the feedback we got from the project was just as powerful from those schools. So I think that's quite a key thing to mention.
Can I also mention as well, Eve, the fact that we opened up to lead participants. So there was a lead participant identified from each school who attended all of the 7 sessions. But also because we were online, we opened it up to other practitioners within their school. So although this was a year 1 focused project, we had schools who invited EYFS colleagues, some TA colleagues, some SLT colleagues as well. So on some of the Zoom or the Teams calls, we had kind of 80 plus delegates in that, and it was really interesting because I think what schools were saying was inviting more people within your setting. Those conversations were really rich because lots of people were hearing those same messages and even though it was year 1 project, EYFS colleagues were trying some of these things out. So
didn't it, amongst a wider group of staff, and it also led to greater reflection and evaluation within those groups of schools as well. Thanks, Lisa. Okay, so Rebecca is going to give us an overview of what that project looked like.
It sort of builds upon a little bit what Lisa was just saying there, actually. I should make it clear that at the moment I am part-time early years advisor and also part-time early years leader in a school in North Tyneside. So I've seen it from both sides this year, which has been very interesting. So yeah, we started with an introduction to the project, thinking about how do we get the children ready to hear sounds, with an acknowledgement that those children, as Eve was saying before, had not had a great deal of phase 1 phonics, and that's really detrimental to their ability to get ready for phonics and reception and then into year 1. We thought a lot about how getting children ready for recognising letters and retaining phonemes and graphemes. But then a large part of this was visual discrimination. And I know that in our school, in the year 1 class, our year 1 lead teacher was really trialling lots of visual discrimination activities with the children, looking at similar symbols, trying to look at the similarities and differences, trying to sort them out. And she found that she was really shocked to find that several of the children really just could not distinguish between some similar symbols. And she also discovered that led to her discovering some children that really did need to go to the opticians as well, which was very useful, and that helped them to get on board with their journey. Looking at what to do if a child can't blend, the importance of having that sequential auditory memory to be able to remember up to 3 things and retrieve those from your memory in order to blend was such an eye-opener for us all, I think. We all thought, oh, wow, of course, if they can't remember the order of car, van, truck, then they're not necessarily going to be able to do that. So that was a big learning step for us all there. Getting the children ready to form letters, we had to really think about instructions with this. Do we know that children really do understand those positional and directional, language? Do we know when we're saying up and over, around, that those children grasp that? And that was a very interesting journey for us. And again, that ties in with struggling to form letters there as well. And finally, looking at children struggling to transfer phonic knowledge to writing. And again, we all know as practitioners that it's really difficult for the children to hold so many thoughts in their mind at once when it comes to writing. And sometimes that composition can fall by the wayside because they're having to concentrate so hard on the actual functions of writing. So there were lots of strategies involved in that. And we've also just recently had a feedback session with staff from lots of different schools sharing all the outcomes and the data relating to the project. One of the things that made it successful was having some intersessional learning, making sure that people went away from their session with a task to do with that group of children and really use those assessment grids and observations and audits so that they are in the process of using the skills framework in order to identify need and then find ways to help meet those needs. People also had to be very familiar with the Launchpad for Literacy website and the resources, and there were so many resources available on there, and it's really useful to have those at your hand.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you. So,
okay.
Oh, sorry.
Go on.
Go on,
no, go on.
No, I was just thinking about this one. Actually, shall I let you do that, Eve? Go on, you do that one.
So what we thought would be a beneficial thing to do as part of the project and as part of sort of the end product at the end of the project, we asked schools to create an evidence of practice for us, which was really intended to encourage schools to really reflect on the journey that they'd been on as an individual school. They'd had all of the sessions with us and the intersessional tasks and lots of feedback within those sessions and lots of sharing of practice and ideas. But we really wanted to encourage schools to really reflect on their individual journey and where their starting points were in relation to their context and their cohorts of children and what it was that they'd taken away, implemented and tried, and then were able to reflect on in terms of having impact. So it was something that we asked the schools to do. So what we thought would be a really useful activity, rather than us talking through one and us you just hearing our voices, is to give you an opportunity to see what an example of evidence of practice looked like. So I'm going to ask Lisa or Rebecca, would you be able to put that link into the chat for us? Now, what we're hoping is that when you click on that link, it will take you to a Google Doc. It is an example of evidence of practice from one of the schools in our first cohort. It's a school down in Whitley Bay, Marine Park First School, and they really took Launchpad and really ran with it. And they've really looked at ways of integrating it across a whole range of situations and groupings and things within school. So what we'd like you to just take a few minutes to do is to access the link. It should come up as a Google Doc. We've put some little emojis over faces so you can't identify any children, and to just take a few minutes to read through that example of practice, as it just sort of can establish some context for you in terms of how a school took the project and then used it and applied it into their own situation, their own setting. Okay, so we thought we'd give you probably about 7 minutes-ish, if that's okay. If some of you feel that you want to go and grab a drink or a cup or a quick comfort break as you're reading through that evidence of practice, please feel free to do that. So it's 10:24, so I'm going to suggest that we come back at 10:31, and hopefully you've had a chance to read through that evidence of practice. If you've got any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. If there's anything you want to ask us about how that evidence of practice is being pulled together. Okay, I'm hoping the link works. If it does,
I've tried it, Eve. I've clicked on it and it works for me. So fingers crossed.
Maybe some thumbs up from some other participants.
Yes, if you can access it, that would be great. Yeah,
just for you.
It works for sure.
Great.
Well, thank you. Never quite sure with some technology.
Oh, thanks, Becky. Thanks, Rachel.
There's quite a few people there saying that it works, so that's good.
Brilliant. Hey everybody, I'm hoping that that's given you a little bit of a flavour in terms of what one of our schools did. Obviously, everybody took the project and did something slightly different with it, depending on the needs of their cohort. But hopefully that's contextualised and given you a little bit of a flavour in terms of how one school have taken that and implemented it. Did anybody have any questions in relation to what they've read? Please feel free to pop them in the chat or unmute your mic if there's anything that you do want to ask. Okay, we shall
sorry, can I
yeah.
can I just I think just want to quickly say before we move on, the part of the success obviously is the absolute hard work and dedication of all the teachers who were involved in the work that they did, but I think that's really pivotal to it, the fact that the teachers who took part didn't feel as if they were just attending 6 CPD sessions and that was it. Equally, if not more importantly, was what happened in between those sessions. The intersessional learning and thinking and conversations were really key. I think if schools had turned up to the 6 sessions and listened and taken in and not been as proactive back in school, I don't think the impact or the buzz or the excitement around the Launchpad would have been as good as it was. So I think that intersessional part, those intersessional parts, and what we kind of suggested that they were really key. And what we also did was we every session we did, we saved into a Google Drive doc that all of our participants had access to. So there were elements of Kirsty's videos that we protected so they couldn't be downloaded. They could just be watched within that drive. We had links to the website, we had links to audit tools, we had links, so everything was there. So and they've still got access to that now. So I think having that, building up that resource bank, as well as the instruction as far as what would like to have a go at in between sessions, and the content of the session supported by Kirsty, I think that came together really, really well as an outline of a project, more action research project. I would feel more so than just training sessions. Eve, I don't know whether you would agree with that.
No, completely agree. And that's how we designed it, wasn't it? So it wasn't just a case of turning up, attending the CPD and then not knowing what to do with it. It was quite specific tasks, wasn't it, that we set teachers to go away and do, or audits to do. And
I think we were very mindful at the time. There was a lot going on in the world and within their own families and within classrooms. So we were very mindful of not being really kind of, you will do this or you'll. It was very much a case of, if you can, you could try. And lots of our schools didn't they? Which was fabulous considering the situation that they were in. So following the 6 sessions, we then came back together for the 7th session, which was our kind of sharing of impact and sharing thoughts and sharing anecdotes. Some of our schools brought data along with them last year, not all. But we also got them to fill in, well, we asked them, to fill in a Google form just to really gather those thoughts for some qualitative and some quantitative data as well for us as an authority to look at to help us plan the subsequent project. This is one of the questions we asked, and it was around was being part of the project. Did they feel that had been a positive impact on particularly their phonics outcomes? Now that was split last year. And lots of having discussions with colleagues, it was very much around the fact we asked them to focus on 6 year 1 children, and for quite a lot of our schools, those children weren't necessarily in school the majority of the time. So that did impact on data. It's a different picture this year, and again we're still gathering in the Google form responses from our current project participants. But during because we actually had our 7th session yesterday with our 2nd project schools, and the data is looking remarkably positive, and the feedback as far as impact on phonic outcomes is looking really positive this year with our schools. So that's great. So someone from our schools yesterday, one of our participants commented on a particular boy within her focus group, year 1 boy, who at the beginning of year 1 they classed as a non-reader, really struggled to blend. Using skills work, using the tool, the Launchpad tool, her team recognised that actually he couldn't recognise an initial sound within a word, and he couldn't hold or sequence 3 objects as Rebecca talked about earlier on, and that they recognised what he could do, but what he couldn't do was really evident from using the skills framework. And she talked about some really carefully, intentionally planned activities within Quality First Teaching that happened within her provision over a course of terms. And she commented on last week a real light bulb moment with this particular boy, whereby she was sharing a book with him, and he was able to read a CVC word, and looked at her and actually beamed as he said, "I can read it. I can read that word." And that was a real milestone for that child, and a real milestone for that teacher too. So I do feel as if particularly the phonics, because that was a focus for us as an authority, I do think there's been some real progress made due to the fact that people have used the skills framework and been able to identify those really granular small steps and where those gaps were. So, okay. The next one was around subject knowledge. Again, going back to one of our outcomes that you shared at the beginning, one of our outcomes was around developing subject knowledge around specifically early language development and communication, and how children build those really core skills to allow them to access to read and to write. We offered to a great extent, some extent, lesser extent, no extent. Now the feedback on this, obviously we asked them to grade it or rank it, but we also asked them to give us some more detail around that in sentences or paragraphs. And what was overwhelmingly, what came across as an overwhelmingly positive thing from the project was around practitioners who've been teaching for 20 years, more than 20 years, some teachers who've been in the profession for 1 or 2 years. Everyone commented on how much they had learnt, as Eve and I and Rebecca had. I mean, at my early years degree was many years ago, and I've mainly been Key Stage 1 and 2. So some of those moments, listening to Kirsty's videos, that the ones that we shared within our project, just some moments where you think that just makes so much sense. And one of our practitioners yesterday, who's been teaching for over 20 years, really strong Key Stage 1 practitioner, said she shared in the online meeting yesterday, "Why has no one told me this before? Why haven't I known this before?" And it was those moments, and the fact that using it as a progressive tool makes so much sense. And people are commenting and have commented around this tool being a missing link that comes prior to an SSP program. So an overwhelming yes on the fact that this project has impacted really positively on subject knowledge for all practitioners, regardless of how long they have been teaching. So that was something that we noticed for both projects. And the last question we asked, or the last question that we share with you, were around the aspects. Obviously, Rebecca mentioned each of those questions. That was the title of a session, one of our 6 sessions. And we designed the program to allow our participants to really get to grips with these 4 aspects. And these were the results from project 1. I would say project 2 reflected this, as far as people were commenting on the impact on all of the areas on their knowledge, but actually memory came out as being something, again, which people talked about yesterday. Memory is often talked about on EHCPs or recommendations from EP, as far as this child's got poor working memory, or they need to build capacity within memory to support them too. And I think when I'm reflecting on my own practice from a number of years ago now, 10 plus years ago, some children in my class were giving targets around memory. And I remember thinking, okay, this child's got poor working memory. Tell me what exactly that I need to do. And I don't think there was the progression was necessarily there. I think what we did was we bought games which we knew supported memory. There were activity banks that we used that we knew were good for developing memory, but there was no element of identifying what they can do and then those skill steps and progression being built from that. So again, our participants very much commented on having an upskilled understanding of visual memory and auditory memory and sequential auditory memory, had a really big impact across the provision as far as reading, writing and communication and those really early fundamental skills. So interestingly, that was mirrored within both of our projects.
Okay, so just to give you a flavour, as Lisa said, yes, we collected data and yes, we asked them to complete a Google form, but we also asked teachers to provide us with some anecdotal feedback and their thoughts around Launchpad and how it had changed their approaches to how they were developing language and literacy in their settings. I'm just going to give you a minute just to read these. I'm very conscious of cognitive overload, so I'll stop talking for a minute or two and let you read what's in the speech bubbles. Okay, so a very common theme running through when we gauged how people felt about use of Launchpad was very much about the skills framework and how it had drawn their attention to how important it is that children make small steps rather than just jumping straight towards the teaching of phonics, for example, in reception, knowing exactly what it is, what the small steps are that need to be developed before the children get there. Teachers often commented on about the spotting the gaps and how actually once they realised what the gaps were, it changed their thinking rather than providing activities and perhaps not understanding why they were doing those activities, having a real key driver. This is what I'm doing and this is why I'm doing it. We had a teacher yesterday who commented on how strongly she felt that being part of this year's project had actually upskilled a lot of the TAs and the HLTAs that worked within her provision. She's at the end of every session had gone away and had shared her learning from the session, talked about what she was intending to put in place and shared that with the staff who worked with her in her provision. And she commented yesterday about how strongly she felt now that the support staff and any other adults that were working with children understood why they were doing the activities that they were doing. And that, I think that for me was quite powerful, because in terms of impact, it's certainly going to have greater impact if you have a broadened knowledge base and a deeper understanding among staff. And if they are staff who then move around other year groups in school, they can take those skills with them and use and apply that new knowledge as they're learning it. So that was really strong and really positive that came back yesterday. In the project last year, we had a practitioner, very, very experienced practitioner. She'd even studied the 3 to 7 age range. She had an early years background, an early years degree, and she was very emphatic last year about how much she really felt that she'd understood, and that even though she felt that she'd already had a really good understanding of early years and provision and practice, how much Launchpad had really refined and focused her thinking and helped her understand how she can break that learning down into even smaller chunks. So that was really powerful. I think we probably would have asked her along today if we'd had the time to ask her, because she's a huge advocate of Launchpad. So they are some of the key things around teacher knowledge and teacher expertise. So it isn't just about the pupils and them making progress, but it is about how do the teachers and adults take that knowledge and use that to really deepen their understanding of the children and their starting points. And then another theme that's come through is very much about that practitioner knowledge of the language skills. So not just the framework of skills and not just about how to break things down, but really understanding what do we mean by high quality phonics teaching. It's not just about I follow my scheme, I follow my program, but actually that recognition that that doesn't work for all children, and that where there are some children for whom phonics doesn't work, to simply just do more and more of the same is not going to help those children make progress. So a really strong theme that came through, and it's come through again this year, is that teachers feel that they are in a better place to understand what it is that the children need to have in place before the explicit phonics teaching starts in reception. And if you've had a chance to look at the skills framework, it breaks it down into such small steps. You really build up an understanding of how important that auditory discrimination is and auditory memory is, and how important the visual skills are and the visual memory, and the fact that those two strands, even if you were to just look at those two strands, it would just raise your awareness hugely in terms of what needs to be in place for those pupils before they begin that explicit phonics teaching. So there were some common themes that were coming through. We're happy to share the report with anybody who would like to read the report in detail. We shared it with Kirsty and obviously shared it more widely, but if anybody did want to read it, please send us an email and we'll share that with you. So in terms of thinking about how those practitioners on the project felt they would use Launchpad for literacy, I think the very strong message that came through to us was there was not a single person who said, I don't intend to use it and I don't want to use it and I'm going to put it on a shelf. So we'd obviously managed to help practitioners understand and recognise the value of Launchpad and how useful it can be, that it's not just, as Lisa said, we've attended CPD, we've done the project, tick, we've done it, but actually we're really recognising the power of this. So in terms of the responses from the first group, and again, this is reflected again this year, is that the huge majority of practitioners know and see the value of putting it into their quality first teaching, to build it into their practice, their provision. Certainly as part of the project, we encouraged practitioners to audit their environments, to audit the language that they were using with children. So having a raised awareness of that, it certainly will help to ensure that their quality first teaching is very, very focused on those foundational concepts. Many teachers said they would continue to use it as an intervention, because essentially our project group initially was focused as it being an intervention with year one children to help close gaps for phonics. So teachers are seeing the value of it being a quality first teaching tool and can be used as an intervention to target and to close some gaps. And as an assessment tool, that's a huge positive. When we go into schools and talk about Launchpad, because the skills framework has broken it down into such small manageable steps, it's a very, very good assessment tool. You can pretty much gauge where children, what they can do, and that's the key thing. We start from what they can do and then look to see how can I build progressively from that. So overwhelmingly, there's thankfully nobody who's going to go and put it on a shelf, and it's not going to go and gather dust. So that's positive. And we've certainly, in our situation now, we've got more of our schools have Launchpad than don't have Launchpad. Okay, hand over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you. So yeah, looking at our next steps, one of the things that teachers felt would be useful would be a termly network meeting. And I think we're all craving those sort of face-to-face meetings. And that's something that we're looking at implementing in the coming year. It would be useful very much to share practice, encourage reflection of approaches, and to strengthen collaboration. I think yesterday when we had our final meeting all together, it was really useful for everybody to hear what had been happening in all of the other schools. And I can see the real benefit of having network meetings for that purpose. I think it kind of reassured you that actually what you'd done was good, and that actually your next step might be, oh, well, actually we'll try that and we'll think about this. So that was very, very helpful. It was also recognised that there's a lot of content. It's a very high level of learning that comes with this. And I think that's really important for teachers and teaching assistants and all staff, because at the moment, I think we do need to have a strong understanding of what we're doing and why, particularly with, and I'm not saying that we do things for Ofsted, we do things for the children, but particularly with the kinds of discussions that Ofsted inspectors tend to have with staff, it's really important that everybody knows why they're doing certain things and why this, why now. And I think this works well for that. But yes, people, I think, need a bit of time to digest the content of the sessions and the resources. And that is part of the way that we have approached it, having one session and then intersessional tasks and then another session to try and make sure that people have time to do that and implement it in the classroom. And I think as well, having a bit of time to navigate the website and the portal, there are so many resources that are really excellent resources, and it is really useful. I know time is always a tricky thing for all people working in education. I know that that's difficult. So having time to navigate the website and portal was deemed to be important as well.
Thanks, Rebecca. So in terms of where we are now in North Tyneside, as I said earlier, we're not any further down the journey than some are nationally, because I know Kirsty's been working with other LAs for longer than she has with us. But we're now in a situation where we have approximately 75% of our schools with Launchpad for Literacy. I feel quite proud of that, because in 2 years we've gone from potentially, I think we had 2. I do remember going to one school before I had the training with Kirsty and being introduced to this framework of skills and just being blown away by it. So I think that was probably about 3 years ago. So in that time, we've now got the majority of our firsts and primaries with Launchpad for Literacy. And we are in a situation where all of our decile 1 to 4 schools now have Launchpad pretty much, I think, bar 1 or 2 schools. So we're in a really strong place in North Tyneside to continue with this journey. We spend a lot of our time promoting Launchpad for Literacy. I think sometimes my English subject leaders are a little bit sick of hearing it. I've used very much the sort of, if you haven't got it, you're missing out. That's very much been my approach. And we kind of almost say now, oh, if you are a Launchpad for Literacy school, because I think it's important that we promote it. We know it works. We've seen the value of it. You know, we've attended Kirsty's training sessions, we talk to schools, we can see the power of it. So we very much promote it at training sessions. And then we often have schools who say to us, oh, we've just bought it. Would you come in, spend an hour with staff going through so that we can start to get a feel for it and begin to use it in school. So we've got a really good range of our schools using it. We've also tried to make sure that our SENCOs are aware of it. We have SENCO network meetings in our local authority. And so we've had the opportunity to go to those SENCO networks and to make sure that we've shared Launchpad for Literacy, to make sure that we broaden that base of understanding so that it's not just this is something that happens in early years, but actually if we've got SENCOs who understand where Launchpad sits in terms of supporting children with specific needs, then you've got that broader base of understanding. And as Lisa and Rebecca and I have said, we're coming to the end of our second project. And we are planning another project moving into next year, which is going to have more of an EYFS focus. So Rebecca and Lisa and I are going to be working on developing that, and it will be open to more widely than just North Tyneside schools, as this year's project has been. So I'm going to pass on. Oh, that's my bit as well, Rebecca, isn't it? So in terms of the plans for next year, we'll have a greater focus on EYFS. Launchpad is designed to be part of your quality first teaching. So rather than advocating it solely as an intervention, which is essentially what the main aims of the original project were, it's much more about now moving it into your curriculum and your provision within your early years classrooms. And we're still going to focus on providing a sequence of training sessions with some intersessional tasks. As Lisa said, we've seen the value in doing that rather than just having one-off training sessions. It's been the coming back and sharing the practice and sharing the ideas that people have found most useful. And what we intend to do moving forward, and Rebecca's going to fill in the detail in a second, is to have a more deeper focus on specific strands. Any of you who've seen the skills progression, the framework of skills, will know that there are multiple strands. So what we're planning to do this year is we're going to focus very much more closely on the auditory and the visual, because they are two of the really key strands initially. So that's what the main focus is going to be. We're not going to ignore the others, but we'll have a main thrust looking at the auditory and the visual strands. So that's our plans for next year. So Rebecca, do you want to give a bit of an overview?
I will, thank you. And one of the reasons, just adding on to what Eve was saying there, that we're choosing to do particularly auditory and visual is partly that once you've learned how to use one of the strands, once you've learned the processes involved, you use the diagnostic tools, you do an audit, and then you develop strategies and approaches to help and support, then you can apply that to any of the strands, I think. And that's where it's really important to have that sort of ability to do that with this particular one. Also, I think the importance of all of these activities, particularly in nurseries, and how they relate to those sort of phase 1 phonics activities. And these sort of broaden and deepen and help us to understand the reasoning behind why we do those sorts of activities. So we will begin with a session about auditory attention, very much helping children to focus their attention and develop listening skills when working with an adult. So this is very much about, especially those early days in September when, you know, you need the children to be able to focus their attention, to come and sit and join in whole class or small group or one-to-one activities. And this session is really going to explore how you can do that and develop their listening skills when working with an adult. Session 2 is about auditory discrimination. So helping children to hear, identify, match sounds, making sure that actually they really can hear the difference between, for instance, different birds or singing or environmental sounds and musical sounds, all sorts of types of different sounds that then can lead later on into those sort of learning phonemes rather than just to accelerate into the phonics program. The third session is about auditory memory, and this is what we talked a lot about in this session, helping children to repeat, copy and remember sounds, songs and rhymes, just building up that memory bank, helping them to develop those skills. Session 4 is sequential auditory memory, which we mentioned before, talking about how children can remember sounds, words and phrases in order. One of the activities that I mentioned earlier about a child and maybe remembering 3 things in order to help them with their blending later on in reception, and also towards the end of nursery as well. Session 5 will be visual attention and discrimination. So it's helping children to look closely, identify similarities and differences. We found with some of our year 1 children, we were shocked to see how they could not distinguish between different symbols. And so we played lots of matching games, lots of pairs games, and that really seemed to help with that. And finally, session 6 is about visual memory. So helping children to remember the meanings of symbols, make connections between different symbols, and also to understand the idea that something can be represented in different ways. And we will have a session 7 on there, which will be a sharing of good practice, which is a very useful session right at the end, so that schools can come together and talk about everything that they've been doing. So I look forward to it. I think it'll be very exciting.
Okay, so that's us. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat or unmute your mics. Hopefully we've given you a good overview in terms of the projects that we've run in North Tyneside and what our plans are next. I think overall, hopefully, we've given the message that we love Launchpad in North Tyneside. I don't think any of our schools would want to do without it now. And yeah, we're here if anybody's got any questions.
Eve Victoria's asked, will you only be able to attend the sessions if you are part of the project? Yet the sessions, Victoria, are the kind of structure of the project. The intersessional sessions happen in between, and you have access to Google Drive and access to videos and access to resources is part of the project. So if you'd like us to send you details of it, more details, then we absolutely can do that.
Stop sharing my screen.
Okay, we'll do that, Victoria.
So thank you so much, everybody. And chances are, anyway, once we get the exact details of that project, I will certainly be sharing it with Launchpad users in the North of the Tyne Combined Authority region, but probably beyond as well. But if you specifically and definitely want that information, if you email me and let me know, and then I can act as a portal between Eve, Lisa, Rebecca and yourselves to make sure that you get that information directly to you.
Super, thank you, Kirsty.
Well, thank you very much. So our next session, if you're able to join, starts at 11:15. So I recommend that everybody goes and gets themselves a quick cup of tea and then hops back onto the next Zoom meeting for whichever session you're attending next. And for those of you who can't attend anything else, thank you for joining just for this bit. I am so grateful to North Tyneside for sharing that story and about how it's been a journey, a progression of upskilling and learning for teachers and for practitioners. And very, very much this has been led by the authority. I've had a couple of chats with them about it, but that's it. They've done all the training, they've done all the delivery, they've done all of the supporting. And like I said right back at the beginning, that was always the intention, that Launchpad was simply a tool to be used by teachers, leaders, but also by existing support networks. So thank you again.
Thanks, Kirsty.
Okay, well, we'll see you all soon.
Thanks, Kirsty. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.